There you go.
Okay.
Okay, well, we'll get started. And thank you so much for joining our webinar today. Actually, a lot more people signed up, and I understand people come in along the course and or later on they watch. So today's webinar presentation is with my colleague, Dr. Anna McCormick. She is a practicing emergency medicine physician, and also Anna is a licensed fiduciary financial advisor. When I say fiduciary, that means that financial advisor puts the best interest, their best interest is for the clients than for them to make money. So I have worked with Anna for a while, and then actually introduced some of the clients to her. I have a lot of good feedbacks and reputation from other people. So I really appreciate Anna joining us here tonight and giving a presentation about financial planning.
Okay, well, thank you for that kind introduction, Dr. Lee, and thank you for all you do for so many to educate us all. So I am going to talk about a winning financial plan. And I am a crazy football fan. I grew up in a little town in Kansas. There was not a lot to do. And so I became a huge Chiefs fan. So we are going to have a little Patrick Mahomes and a little bit of football talk. But the reality is, I think even if you aren't a football fan, there are some similarities between planning for a football game or trying to win, let's say, the Super Bowl, and developing your own unique financial plan. And if you're not a Chiefs fan, I'm very sorry. Think about your favorite team. Okay, so let's go next slide. Let's see. Okay, so I want to start though with a disclaimer. Especially as an advisor, there are a lot more rules. It's a lot easier to give advice financially if you're just talking to your friends, but because I am licensed, so I want to tell you that the goal of this presentation is to inspire you to start thinking about your own unique financial plan. This is not complete, and don't take specific advice here without talking with someone who knows your unique situation. And you can read all of that if you would like. And then more disclaimer, which you can read. And then a reminder. And so every single person is unique, and that's really true of our financial situation as well. And so when I give advice, I want to look at the whole financial picture, and I don't know each of your financial pictures or your complete situation. So this presentation, hopefully I can share my story, tell you how I got here, give you some general educational information. It may or may not apply to you. And again, don't make financial decisions based on this presentation without talking with someone who knows your unique situation. If you're working with an advisor, use BrokerCheck, and you can investigate me or any other advisors on BrokerCheck, and you can look at any complaints and where someone's licensed. Okay. And then a little bit more about me. So I'm an emergency physician. I graduated from the Ohio State University, especially if you're a Michigan fan. I'm a full-time emergency physician, again, graduated in 2009. So I've been practicing for over 10 years now. Last year, I started as an investment advisor at Peterman Financial Group. And how that sort of started was 5 or 6 years ago. So I was one of those people who worked really hard, picked up extra shifts, but really did not know a whole lot about money. I had met with a couple advisors, and each person that I had met with, really, it was more transaction based, and it just wasn't a good fit for me. And so I really didn't worry about it. And I probably had a little bit of like a poor mentality because I grew up as one of 7 kids. And so all I could think about was I had all the school loans, and I was very focused on getting rid of that. And so that's sort of where I put my focus the first 4 or 5 years. And so about 5 or 6 years out, I realized, hey, everyone says the stock market is doing well, but it really doesn't look like my 401k is doing well. And I was one of those people who maxed out my 401k each year. And so one of the guys I worked with seemed to know a lot about investing. And I asked him, I said, will you teach me about the 401k? I said, I'm pretty sure I could do better. And he said, absolutely. So we went to Barnes and Noble and I brought my computer and he told me about Morningstar. And I looked at the like 35 different options I had in my 401k. And at the time, our 401k really did not have many passive funds. I think it had one passive index fund. And so I was completely lost. So I had actually like read the White Coat Investor book and had done a little bit of reading, but I really didn't know how to apply it for me because I didn't have those options in my 401k at the time. So he showed me Morningstar. I started looking at funds. He gave me some general advice like, Anna, don't make too many changes at once. And I came home and I told my husband, I think I'm going to make some changes in my 401k. And I will never forget because my husband said, do not screw up our retirement. We really should have someone who knows what they're talking about doing this, and do not touch my money. Um, so that's how it started. And a year later, he gave me his password and was like, do whatever you want. And so that's how it started. And so it sort of continued and it got to like learning more about money. And then it even went further. I started thinking about like, well, how long do I have to work this hard? Like, how much do I need to actually save for retirement? And, are our 401k is going to be enough? So then I started looking at other options. And then COVID hit. And I lived in my basement for like 6 or 8 weeks when I wasn't sure if everybody was going to die. And while I was doing that, I watched the Leverage and Growth Summit. And one of the doctors on there, Dr. David J, was a financial advisor. And it was sort of a hobby of mine. And so I signed up for a meeting with him and then did coaching with him. And I realized, hey, I really like this advising. I'd sort of been helping friends and family sort of on my own. And I thought this would be a cool sort of side gig. So that's how this whole started. It was a lunch date at Barnes and Noble. And really my full-time job is being an ER physician, but I like being an advisor as well because in both jobs I get to help people. So that's a little bit about me. I'm definitely a fiduciary advisor. I still consider this a hobby. And so my goal is for my clients to do well and just to do what's best for them. Okay, so let's get to you guys. So we live in challenging times. Most of us in the US probably have experienced inflation over the past year, so everything costs a little bit more. Energy costs have been up, food costs are up. There's a lot of uncertainty in our world with the war between Russia and Ukraine, with tensions between China and Taiwan. So there's a lot of challenges, and it's probably more important than ever to be good stewards of our money and to have a financial plan and have financial goals. So the title of this was Winning for Your Financial Future. And I think the cool thing about financial planning is that each individual person gets to decide what winning is. So it can mean retiring at 55. It can mean sending your kids to college. It can mean taking time off and traveling around the world. It can mean leaving a legacy. It can mean donating to, a certain number of dollars to charity. So you get to decide what winning is. And I think that's one of the things that I like is I like figuring out like, what do people really want? And then the goal is to create a plan to win based on your values and your goals. And I think where some people get mixed up is that sometimes we set a goal, like I want to retire at 55 or I want to do this, but we don't, when we're setting that goal, sometimes we don't think about our values. So if our goal is to retire at 55, but we want to be a stay-at-home mom, then it might be a little more challenging. And so if you can think about your values, whether it's your family, faith, and then think about your goals and how they are all intertwined, it can I think it makes it easier to achieve your goals. And I think too, when you have a goal that correlates with your core values, you're more inspired and you're more apt to work to achieve that goal. And so literally when I sit down with planning clients, I have them write down their values and then we have them write down their goals and we make sure that their values are our goals and values basically work together. So these are some of the goals that some people just want stability. Some people really like fun and relaxation. It doesn't matter what your goal is, or what your values are, just make sure that those align. And then questions that I tend to ask people, and actually that I've been asking myself, is the way you spend your time and your money, does it reflect your values? And then are your present choices and habits moving you towards the future you want? I can tell you for me personally, because I have a financial plan, I know there are certain things I want to do, but I'm also a little bit of a workaholic. So I'm someone who can like sign up for extra committees, or there's always something new in the financial business to do. And so I've had to tell myself, like, is the way I'm spending my time reflecting my values? And so I'm trying to block out from after school with my kids when I'm not working in the ER, that there's like a 2 to 3 hour time period where that is their time. And it's really hard because I'm one of those people who likes to work and likes to be busy. So these are questions we should ask, and they're really important components of financial planning. And I think this is probably why when I met with financial planners, it didn't resonate with me because they were asking me like, how do you want to invest X amount of dollars? And really what I wanted from them was, how can I retire at 55? How can I work part-time at 50? So those were related to my values. And if I would have said, hey, can you help me develop a plan to retire at this point? It would have been a whole lot easier. And I think I would have been more engaged. And so that's a thing too, if you're working with a financial advisor, if you tell them your goals, it may make the relationship work better because they may be able to help you, whereas they otherwise might be thinking of it more in terms of how can I help you invest X amount of dollars. But when you can give them the big picture and here's where I want to get, they can really help you, I think, in a more meaningful way. Okay. So more questions I like to ask people. And I am surprised a lot of people really have not thought about, simple questions like this. So when do you want to retire? And then have you done a realistic assessment of how much money you need to retire? I've sat down with people who have said, I plan on saving $300 a month, and they're 35 years old and they say, I want to retire at 40. Well, if that is, that's not a realistic assessment for most, or really, I don't think for anyone in terms of $300 a month for 5 years to be able to retire at 40. But people a lot of times they haven't actually ran the numbers. Another question or things you should think about, there's oftentimes large financial obligations like a child's education or supporting a family member. Those are things that can make it hard to achieve your goals. And so if you plan for them, it can make it easier and more meaningful. And then big experiences or purchases that you need to save for. And again, when you think of your values and goals, sometimes you can think about like, hey, this is an experience I want to do with my children, or this is something that I really want to do because it will bring value, or it's a charity that I really believe in. So getting specific, I think, really helps people, and you need to have specific questions and think about specific answers. Okay, so a goal without a plan is just a wish. And this is one of my favorite quotes because I think it's really easy to have goals and it's really great to have good goals or great goals or awesome goals. But if you don't have a plan and then if you don't execute the plan, you're unlikely to achieve that goal. And you think about again in terms of football, like it's really easy to say, I want to win the Super Bowl or I want to score 4 touchdowns. But most football teams, especially on the NFL level, they're going to have specific plans and they're going to look at their players and their individual talents. And they're going to look at the situation and say, how am I most apt to get to my goal? And so you need specific plans generally to get where you're wanting to go. And then you need to execute. So execution is another thing that I think we all struggle with. And without a plan, I think it's really easy to get into the habit of spending everything you make. I've heard someone use the term job as just over broke. And I think a lot of people, if we make more money, we spend a little more money. And I can tell you that, I'm good at spending money. So I can always think of things to spend money on or think of, people to give money to. So if you can have a plan and if you can execute it, you can just have more control later on. I think another thing without a plan, you can define what winning means. I've noticed some people, they set goals, and because let's and that's people have different mentalities. So some people have more of a saving mentality or more frugal, and so some people can be so frugal that they don't enjoy life. And that's one of the important things about having a plan. If you have a plan that's well thought out and has a high probability of success, then it makes it easier to enjoy things. Or then if you have extra funds, you can say, I want to spend this money on something fun. It just gives you freedom, is what I have noticed, because it makes me sad when people say, I don't have money to do this. And really they do. They just haven't looked at the big picture. And then without a plan, it's easy to squander opportunities. And this is another thing, you just really want to take advantage of good situations. There's always going to be times where something may come up, which is a really good, opportunity. For example, just to try to give like a real life example, in general, certificates of deposits really have not paid, well the past several years. And so it's been sort of a waste of time to put money in a certificate of deposit. But now some of these are paying over 3%. And so, I have clients who have money that's set aside for taxes for next year. Well, some of them are actually, they're sort of taking advantage of the opportunity. It maybe wasn't part of their plan, but they're like, hey, I have 50 grand that I'm not planning on needing to use until April. And so they're now putting in a CD for 3%, for a 3-month CD. So that's and a way for them to take advantage of the opportunity. And it wasn't necessarily part of their plan, but they're sort of changing up their plan to improve things. So you have a plan, but you want to take advantage of opportunities. Okay. So how much do you need to retire? This was one of the first questions I asked. And a lot of times when people work with an advisor, this is one of the first questions they ask me. They just want to know, like, how much do I need? And I tell them it depends. It depends on when they retire, their return on investments, the risk within their investments, how long they expect to withdraw from those investments, how long they expect to live, which obviously no one knows, and then what they want to leave behind. So again, there's a lot of thought work that sort of goes into the start of financial planning. Take a drink of water. So I'm going to give some examples of some specific numbers. These are all hypothetical examples and are to be used for illustrative purposes only. You can find lots of financial calculators out there on the web. We have many at our Peterman Financial website, but these are ways that you can come up with some projections to help you come up with a plan. Okay, so compound interest is very powerful, as Warren Buffett says. And one of the things I've noticed in financial planning is that people tend to start thinking about developing a plan oftentimes when they're 40 or 50 years old. And the younger you start, the better. But you also can see that starting today is better than starting tomorrow. So these are some examples of, you can see the difference between saving 20, 40, and 60,000. So you can see that the difference, if you save 20,000 a year for 25 years, you have about 1.2 million. Whereas if you're saving 60,000 for 25 years with a 7% return, those first three examples all have 7% returns, you're going to have 3.7 million. And I think sometimes people get bored by the numbers, but it's really important to come up with numbers because you want to figure out your savings rate, and then you want to look at your returns and come with a plan to see, are my projections likely to be accurate? And so then let's look, if we save that 60 grand a year, but if we only have a 5% return, well, in that case, you're only going to have about 2.5 or 2.8 million. And then if you have a 9% return, you're going to have about 5 million. So when I talked about my specific situation, why I wasn't doing well in my 401k my first 5 years out, so I was 30 years old, but I had sort of a little bit of a poverty mentality. So I was invested very conservatively because I was afraid of losing money. But that difference between, of 3 or 4% return versus a 10% return is a big difference. And again, in more risk, there's more downside risk as well. But you want to make sure, for me at 30, I didn't need to be invested so conservatively on money that I was not planning to need for over 30 or for over 25 years. So compound interest makes a big deal over time. This is how you can become a millionaire pretty easily. Okay, and then saving early matters. So I mentioned that. Let me see if I can. Okay. So in these scenarios, you can see a 7% annual return again. You can see a 4% return after age 60, and then we're assuming a withdrawal rate of $51,000 a year, just trying to keep it simple. And then 3% each year to account for inflation. So in scenario 1, we're saving 10 grand a year. In scenario 2, you're starting, instead of at 20, you're starting at 30. And in scenario 3, you're starting at 40. And so what you can see is starting at 20, this person has $2 million when they retire. When you start at 40, you only have 400,000. And you can see that you quickly run out of money. Another thing I want you to notice is, these returns are exponential. So that first 5-10 years, it really doesn't feel like the person probably is making much traction. But the farther you go, the greater the rate of rise. And so just give it time, keep consistently saving, and you're more apt to achieve your goals. Again, nothing is guaranteed, but you want to just, you want time and compound interest. Okay, and then in this scenario, we're saving 20,000. And if 20,000, we can see a big difference again, starting between 20, 30, and 40. And, I didn't run these numbers probably until about 4 years ago. But running the numbers really helped encourage me to save. And then I started looking at, hey, if I save a little bit more, I'm more apt to achieve these goals. And so I would just encourage you to actually run numbers, have reasonable return rates. And that way you can look at, is what I am saving, is it projected to get me to where I want to go? Next slide. Sorry, it's like there we go. So if you start saving later in life, you're going to have to save more to reach your goals. And this is okay. And that was the slide we just went over. So another way to sort of do calculations is just to look at what's my end goal. So for me, depending on how much you have saved, you can usually calculate a withdrawal rate between 2 and 5%, depending on how much you've saved. So $1 million, you should be able to withdraw between 20 and 50,000 a year. And I can go into more detail, or it's probably not for this webinar because this is pretty general, but there are some other things I do from a safety perspective and risk perspective for my clients. But let's just look at 1 million. So you can calculate backwards and you can use calculators. And this is one that I use from the Peterman Financial website. So if I wanted $1 million, if I saved 8,800 a year for 30 years with an 8% return, I would have $1 million. If I only had a 6% return, then I would need to save 12,000 a year. And then if I only save for 10 years, and I need $1 million, then I'm going to need to save about 70,000 a year for an 8% return, or 76,000 a year approximately with a 6% return. So again, and some of you may be 40 and say, I've just started to think about that. Again, every day you wait to sort of come up with a plan, it gets harder. So today is the day. And that's why you're spending a Saturday night here. But I would encourage you to run some numbers and do some calculations, and that will really help you. And again, you can either look at how much I'm saving and where does that get me, or you can say, I want to have X number of dollars, and you can work backwards and figure out how much do I need to save. Okay. And then I think a lot of us, and I've heard like, well, I don't have enough money to save for retirement. And I've actually literally heard that from physicians. So, I mean, some people say skip the latte for $5 a day. That's about 1,800. Cutting cable, looking at subscriptions, looking at credit card statements. And I know I look at my credit card statement and I look at my takeout um, or ordering out, and that's a way that I waste a lot of money. But we all have things, if we look at our statements, that we can generally save money. But sometimes there are times in life, whether or not you're going through a divorce, unexpected expenses, health issues. So if your money situation seems impossible, think about it in terms of 3 ways. How can you generate more income? How can you save more? Or how can you change your circumstances? Whether that's selling a house, picking up extra shifts, getting a side gig, those are all ways you can improve your situation. And then, I've told people sometimes really there is no way you can generate more income, whether it's child custody issues, again, or health issues. And maybe what you need to do is just, focus on your health or focus on learning a new talent or finding a way to be more valuable in your job so you have more flexibility. So I feel like nothing's impossible. We just all need to take advantage of the situations we're in. That is my dad and I at a Chiefs game. We have made that is his birthday present every year as I take him to a playoff game. We've done that for 3 years. And for me, that is an investment in joy and fun because my dad loves the Chiefs. And my husband thinks that standing outside in January in the cold and yelling at the top of their lungs, "Go Chiefs," is not fun. So I invest in joy with my dad with our Chiefs games. Okay, so based on your goals, so hopefully now you can do some calculations, figure out how much money you need to sort of get where you want to go, and then you want to focus on executing. So based on your goals, make executing a high priority. Generally, it's easy to find, to make an excuse. But if you can do consistent savings and then be mindful of what you're saving, because again, in the examples I showed earlier, a difference between, 1 or 2% difference in return can really affect your long-term bottom line over time. So if you can focus on executing and making sure your investments are optimized, you're going to be more apt to meet your goals. This quote by Patrick Mahomes, it says, "You want to make the big play, you want to throw a touchdown, you want to throw a touchdown every single play. But at the same time, you have to know that it's a process." And I think it's a process in terms of investing. And it's really easy to want to have that winning lottery ticket or that stock that, goes up 100 times, and that may happen, but focus on execution and your process, and you're more apt to meet your goals. And then it definitely takes a team in football. And I think when it comes to financial planning, it takes a team as well. And you want to have someone who can have a big picture level, but then you also need the details as well. So components generally of a good financial plan. Some is portfolio management, so managing your actual investments. There's overall wealth planning, estate planning, risk management. We run most of our clients through Riskalyze, which is a software where we put people's investments in, where we can basically look at the risk they have and then the risk they think they have. And then with that software, we also have people answer questions so we can see the risk they want. And that's really important so that we can make sure that we're investing in a way that is congruent with people's risk. And then life insurance and disability insurance, those are really important components of financial plan, because if you can't generate income, it can make things much harder. And then life insurance is a way to help take care of your family if something happens to you. Tax planning is very important. I tell people it's really hard to beat the market, but you at least can be tax efficient with your investments. And part of the reason I chose a firm with a CPA is I want to make sure that I'm tax efficient and I want to use his knowledge to help clients. And so I think that is really important. Okay. So pitfalls in comprehensive plans, again, we spent a lot of time and earlier in this presentation where I talked about your goals and your values, spending a little bit of time thinking about them can go a long way. What I've noticed is that a lot of times a client's holdings and investments don't correlate with their goals. I have been surprised at how many people put all of their 401k into a money market. And I'm not saying that that's not wrong, especially if you were close to retirement right now with the way the market is, that might be reasonable depending on how much, but that oftentimes I see a mismatch. So mistakes, I try to learn from every mistake I make so that I never make them again. I think investing, it's easy to make mistakes. One thing I see is that, there's different sort of theories of portfolio management or different ways that people invest their money. And I find if you stick with one investment philosophy, you're apt to do better than if you're just changing consistently. If you're constantly changing, sometimes you're getting in at sort of the peak at the previous investment. I talked about being efficient with your investments. So I have also been surprised at how many people don't know the difference between a Roth IRA or a Roth 401k and then a traditional IRA and a traditional 401k. So for me personally, because I'm not going to have to pay taxes on a Roth, I try to be most aggressive with the investments in my Roth. Whereas in my traditional IRA, I'm not paying taxes on that money now, but then when I withdraw that money in retirement, I will pay taxes on that in my income rate. So I tend to put my more conservative investments in my traditional IRA, and then in my Roth, I'm more aggressive. So I've noticed, so what I tell people when I look at their retirement plans is we try to figure out what's best for them. But in general, a traditional 401k is going to be better for older workers or those that expect to have lower earnings in retirement. A Roth 401k tends to be better for younger workers or those that expect to be working for 20 plus years into retirement. And you can literally use calculators that help people see what the difference. Let's see. Sujan, did you want to make a comment? I saw
Oh,
you
there's
raised
a
your hand.
couple, there's a couple questions. I don't know if you want to
Yes.
answer at the end or do you want to answer while you're going?
You know what? Let me look. Let's see. Let me answer at the end and I'll try to go through because we're getting close to the end and then I'll answer.
Okay.
Okay. And I can go back to slides. Okay. So tax brackets, this is really important to understand and know. So there's 7 marginal tax brackets and you can see the different percentages. And I hear people say, well, if I earn more money, I'm just going to have to pay more in taxes. And that's absolutely true. But if you're not putting the full amount of money into retirement, you could just increase your retirement savings and potentially not have as big of tax impact. And then I show the different tax brackets here. And again, I make a big deal about tax brackets. And this really is a big deal too when you retire, because if you've saved so much money that you're going to be in a high tax bracket when you retire, you actually might want to start when you're younger, contribute or in middle age, contributing to a Roth IRA. And then here's tax rates, again, more about tax rates. But I think it's important to know the numbers because my advice for clients usually depends largely on the tax bracket they're in now and then the tax bracket that we think they will have when they retire. And again, nothing is guaranteed, but if you already have a large amount saved now, then you may be in a high tax bracket in retirement. And, another thing, the tax rates may go up in the future too. So that plays a role into things. It's hard to predict the future. Then this is just, again, more about tax rates. So other ways to be efficient in your investments. So clients think about their retirement accounts as separate investments. And this was me, again, talking with my friend. So I came home and, looked up Morningstar on all of the options in both my husband's retirement and my retirement accounts. And then I was trying to, this is when he let me start making some changes in his. But what happened was I got very stressed out about, well, I want 70% in this and 20% in this and 10% in this. And I was trying to do that for both. And I was all confused. And then all of a sudden it hit me that for us personally, it was better to just look at one big set of investments. And so I basically picked the best bonds, and actually he had the best bonds and my bond funds weren't very good at the time. And so I had almost no bonds in mine. And so I literally just said, this is just going to be one big pot of money. And then I'm going to make changes basically once or twice a year. And I'm going to look at it as one big pot. When I look at my clients' finances, I tend to, whether they're single, married, whatever they want to look at their specific situation, but I really try to look at their investments as a whole. So I have one client who she has part of her investments with another advisor. And so based on what her other advisor has put her funds in, I've made my investments for her a little bit different. And we just had a discussion recently where she said, I'm going to make this change over here. And I said, I appreciate you telling me, because based on that, since you're going to be really aggressive over there, we're going to be less aggressive with yours. So looking at it as all of your accounts is one big component of your financial plan. They're all components of the team that's trying to get you to where you want to go. And so if you look at it as they're all components and they're all going to work together, then you aren't looking at, hey, there's 5 different accounts that I have to have the right combinations of things. Okay. And then risk associated with investing. So there's a lot of these. In this past year, we've seen a lot of these risks play out. We've seen inflation, we've seen political risk, we've seen currency risk recently with Britain, purchasing risks if you're a business owner. So there's a lot of risk, and understanding those risks are important to your overall plan, and you want to minimize those risks as much as possible. And that's something, I try to do for my clients is we look at their risk and then we look, is there a way to get the same results with a little less risk? Okay, we're almost done, and then I'll answer lots of questions. Okay, so Tom Brady, again, I'm more of a Chiefs fan, but I say he didn't turn into Tom Brady without consistent practice, a plan, and a few lucky breaks. So I'd say develop your own personal plan, keep striving to be better, keep improving your plan, put in the effort, and then always look for luck or look for opportunities to do well. And I think more disclaimers. And now I can answer questions. So let's start going through questions. Okay.
Thank you so much, Anna. I'm just gonna help you a little bit. I put questions as you go over some of the content so that I remember.
Yes.
But I guess Veronica had a question. She asked about, can you explain what you mean by more aggressive? I think there's a part that in the slide that you're mentioning that more aggressive investment. We know if we do, safe or average growth is like 7 to 8%, right? That's the average market growth. Yeah. But is there any way that you can increase that return of investment, or what do you mean by aggressive investment?
Being more aggressive. Yeah. Yes. So, I mean, there are different ways to be aggressive, and each situation is unique, but here's an example of being aggressive. So one of the guys I work with, he looks every week at sort of the biggest losers. in terms of stocks. And he doesn't buy a lot of individual stocks, but he has sort of a certain amount that he will put sort of, he said like Apple was down at one point significantly several years ago. And he said, I believe in Apple. So he put some little, some extra money in Apple. So in my mind, investing in individual stock is very aggressive. I feel more comfortable with index funds or groups of funds. But in general, stocks have been considered more aggressive, and in general, bonds have been considered less aggressive. What we have seen in bonds, and one of the things actually for our clients, we started moving them out of bonds really in January of last year. And that was because as interest rates go up, bonds become less valuable. So if you think about bonds as a general bond you buy for $1,000, if it's paying a 5% return, then you would get 5% each year on that bond. That's me simplifying it. Well, if interest rates go up and now you can get 7% on a bond, you're not going to want to buy that bond that's only paying 5%. And so now if you want to sell that bond that's paying 5%, you're going to sell it for less. So that bond that you paid $1,000, someone else may only willing to pay $900. And so for bonds, what we've seen this last year, and part of why the people's retirement accounts it's been so painful, is that as interest rates have gone up, bond returns or prices have gone down. And so people have seen that in their retirement accounts. And so for us, we have, 3 years ago, we weren't really putting people in money market funds or CDs. And now we've been putting some people's bond funds really in like CDs or fixed investments. So that's being less aggressive, but it's also taking advantage of the situation. In general, people would say a general bond might be less aggressive, but again, if you're buying a corporate bond, different bond funds are going to be more aggressive than others. So I think if you're doing it yourself, you want to make sure you're using probably broad-based index funds. If you're investing yourself and have sort of like play money, you might be investing in individual stocks or taking advantage of companies that you believe in that maybe are valued lower. Does that help?
Yes, it's a follow-up question. So I don't know if you can answer this question or not, but do you have a client? Sometimes do you advise clients to index funds and, the individual funds, or is it depending on their
So I
situation?
look at each person's, total picture. So I have a couple of clients who they don't have great index funds in their retirement accounts, and they really don't have much extra money to invest other than retirement accounts. And so they're in mutual funds and they're just not in a broad index fund. But most people have access to broad-based index funds. And I don't know, I will always be a believer in index funds for a component of people's wealth. And I think it's easier for me to be tax efficient and not so much worry about picking individual stocks. But I'm not opposed to individual stocks. You just have to, if all of your retirement is in one stock, there's a lot of risk there. And so I get nervous when people's retirement are hinging on just a couple of companies.
I agree about the individual stock. Yeah, because you never know how things gonna go.
And I mean, almost all of my clients, there's a component that are in broad-based passive index funds. And I'm a big fan, and anybody who tells you that like active funds are the best for every person, that would concern me. It's hard to beat passive funds long term, but sometimes you can see opportunities, in other situations or specific things that might work for a client.
What's the active funds and passive funds?
Okay, so an active fund, an active fund might be a manager that buys and sells stocks in one particular. So I think like in my work retirement, there's like a victory fund that, someone from that company picks all of the stocks and that individual fund and then sells them.
I
Whereas a
see, I see.
passive fund might be like the S&P 500,
Mhm.
where the, it has the group of 500 large cap US based
Mhm.
funds.
I see. That makes sense. Okay, I'm just going to answer. Well, let's answer Veronica's question again. So
Yes.
she, in the earlier presentation, she says with the recession, changes in economy has been a little bit dramatic this year. And then she asked if would your investment advice has changed because of the change in the economy, current economy. Mhm.
So probably my it's hard to know. I mean, I would need to know her specific situation, but in general, in January of last year, we were encouraging people to maybe move money from their bond funds to like a money market or a low duration bond fund. So that was a change we made. At this point, bond funds, most people's retirement are going to be down significantly, so I wouldn't probably make that change now. Um, in general, you don't want to buy when it's really high or sell when it's super low. So if you're in a situation where you're not happy and you're broadly invested, I would say just wait it out. 8 to 10 years is a long time. Most cycles are going to be, downturns are going to be 3 years or less.
Mhm.
So I would say, in general, I would say don't make a bunch of big changes where you're selling when it's low. This might be an opportunity if you have a little extra to invest more to sort of dollar cost average in because of the current recession. And, it may get worse over the next 6 to 12 months.
Mhm.
Some of my clients who are putting money in or move money to me, we said, you know what, we're not going to just put this in as one lump sum. We're going to move money monthly. And so I've done that with some clients. So I'd say if you have new money to move in, you might not want to put it all as one lump sum in tomorrow. You might want to dollar cost average that in over
Mhm.
6 to 12 months. But in your current funds, getting scared because of the market, you're maybe selling at a significant loss.
Mhm. Yeah. People talk about dollar costing average at this time, instead of buying lump sum. I hear that advice quite a bit. Okay, thank you so much. And I can skip all of my questions. We can come back to that. But Angel had a question about how to become a fiduciary financial advisor.
Okay. So you have to, the SIE is the first test you take, and anybody can take that test. And then you have to be sponsored by a firm, and then you can take other tests that allow you to be an advisor. And then you have to basically have a malpractice, basically what we would think of as malpractice insurance. I would say if you want to be an advisor, make sure you work with someone that you trust and that has lots of knowledge. I mean, I realized I felt very comfortable managing my own money and I felt comfortable managing, simple things, but I wanted to make sure that I was working with someone who had a lot more knowledge. And so part of why I picked the firm that I'm with is that the owner is a CPA. He actually still does some tax returns. And so I liked that knowledge. But the first step generally is the SIE, and then you have to get sponsored and basically be associated with a firm that involves, a background check and education, and then additional testing.
How long does it take in time frame wise?
Well, so it's been a little while since I've, taken those tests. I did the tests over about 6 months. I took my tests over. Some people stretch it out longer. I'm sort of one of these people that sort of is like embrace the suck. And so I was just like, I just want to get it done.
Do it at the
Um,
same time.
yeah, well, and I had a lot of knowledge anyway, but I learned a
Mm.
whole lot more. And I would say financial advising is sort of like medicine and that there's all these different facets. I mean, what I've realized is, I have I have people who help with insurance and they're the insurance experts. I have people who help with cash balance plans or helping, manage 401ks. So you do want to make sure too, in terms of if you're a fiduciary advisor, sort of what's your specialty. We think about that in medicine. You want to think about what's your specialty going to be, or what are you going to focus on as an advisor. And then you want to make sure that you have the other components, that you have at least people that you can work with that have that knowledge, because you're really not doing your clients any favors if you aren't giving them comprehensive planning and aren't giving them comprehensive knowledge. And the fiduciary thing, like, for me, it's just, I can't imagine not being a fiduciary advisor. Grateful. It's just,
But I mean, there's a very small percentage though, amongst all the financial advisor. What percentage is the fiduciary?
I don't
Uh,
know. Some of it has to do with captive and non-captive sort of agents. So, and that
uh,
was a term I wasn't familiar with, but when you think of captive, think of I'm working for one company and I can only sell their products. And so
mhm,
I think that's where you get into more of, I'm not necessarily a fiduciary because I have to sell company X's products.
mhm,
It was very important to me that I wanted to be able to pick the best I thought of products in each thing. So I don't just work with one company. And that was important to me. Sometimes the bigger companies, they might have, a lot of them, they're just bigger and they might have, more training. I remember at Money Concepts is our broker dealer, and I was at a meeting, and someone from another company, they said they loved Money Concepts. For the training and the support, but they said, they really care about their clients and what's in their clients' best interest. And they said at their other job that they got promoted and were told, now make sure you know that it's always this company first. The company first, then you, then the client. So that was something that's just, I can't imagine, and I wouldn't be wasting my time.
mhm. Yeah. Okay,
Okay,
that's
so
good.
let's do how is it possible to make more than a 7% return? Okay, so 7% return, I try to, when I'm doing my calculations, I try to when I'm looking at long-term planning, I try to calculate less than I'm expecting. Because if you're expecting a 12 or 13% return, you may get that. But if you don't meet those goals, it can be harder to make up. So, buying on the dip is something that can be helpful. Buying when a company is undervalued, that's beneficial. I know a lot of physicians do real estate, and I'm not an expert on real estate, but if that's something you have knowledge on, that's a way to improve returns, especially if you have knowledge. For me, I don't have any extra time to like manage a property. But definitely with syndications, there may be more risk, but there's the potential for more return. So, I would say, this year I don't have a positive 7% return on, in my 401k personally, but in general, I've done much better than that. But I've consistently bought and I keep buying when it's low, but I'm also not, all in. But I think the term buying on the dip and buying when it's low, I sort of like the combination of dollar cost averaging, but then sort of waiting to put my money in during the month when it's lower. And then sometimes, someone was asking me like, well, what should I do if I get X amount of dollars in January? And I said, well, here's the deal. I don't know, because I don't know what it's going to be like in January. I said, given the
Mhm,
economy, if the market's 40% down, may want to put it in the stock market. This person has a lot of other knowledge. And if something came up in the right way for them in terms of real estate, that might be a better situation. So I think some of it, there's plenty of ways to make more than 7% return. And I think you just have to look at both the history of things and then the current situation. And anytime you buy or invest in something, you want to look in something that either is undervalued or you believe truly has value.
mm. So what I hear is, knowing what I know and stuff like either you save more each year and okay with a 7%, 8% return, or if you don't make enough money to save more, then being yeah, I guess we have to pick our battle, like being more aggressive and learn something about different investment, having more aggressive investment strategy other than the traditional retirement, I guess.
I would agree with that. I would say if you're
Mm,
watching and paying attention, that
mm,
it's probably easier to do better.
mm.
I look at I mean, in my own 401k, I was pretty aggressive about buying when things were down. Again, in my situation, I was invested very conservatively initially. And so I just sort of kept buying on dips. And, this year there's been a lot of opportunities to buy on dips. So I just keep so, and when the market is when the market is poor, I mean, I've heard people say, well, I don't want to invest because the economy is bad. And, I'm not going all in and I always have, my emergency savings that I don't touch, but I know that just long-term keeping at it, is good. And I do think, again, if you're watching and become mindful, it's easier to do well. But I would say when you're doing your calculations, try not to over calculate.
Mm. Well, and then, people say hold the cash when the economy, the market is not doing well, but the inflation rate is like 8%. So if you hold cash, you lose 8% every year.
Well, I mean, it's a balance again, so we
Uh-huh.
hadn't really sold CDs. Like we have options to buy CDs for clients,
Mhm.
but because sort of the mantra was cash is trash, which I would say in 2017 or 2018, like I would, that was sort of my mantra. And right now I'm sort of like, it's hard to know what's going on with the economy. Some people believe we're close to the bottom. Some people believe we have a lot more to go. But that's why for my clients who are sitting in cash, like, we
Mm.
weren't calculating that they were going to make any money on their cash. So putting their money in, 2 or 3 month CDs and making 3.2%, it's FDIC insured, it's guaranteed. So that's a way that, yes, that's not getting them their 7%, but at least sort of their emergency savings isn't losing money and it's helping offset inflation. Someone asked about general tax saving strategies for physicians. So some of it depends on what type, how you're employed, whether or not you're a 1099, whether or not you're a W-2 employee. So that can really change things. Cash balance plans or deferred comp plans for small physicians groups can be a great way to save additional pre-tax money for physicians. And that's something that my physician group just started this last year. And I think will be a good way for us to increase our savings.
I think you covered most of the question. I think Veronica asked another question at the end. How much of an emergency fund do you recommend and where to save that amount, saving account?
So again, there's no right answer for any particular person. I think for most people, you're going to want at least 3 months of savings. Some of it depends on what your expenses are. So if your house is paid off and you don't have a lot of expenses, then you probably need less. Ways that you can help yourself in terms of an emergency fund. For some people, home equity line of credits are a way to get to have extra savings if you need it. When interest rates were low, my particular bank, it's $25 a year for a home equity line of credit. So we've never used it, but it is something that we have as an extra buffer. Something I did recently, just for me personally, in terms of sort of our emergency fund. So we have an emergency fund. It's still in savings. Some of it's probably going to go in a CD because at least I'll be earning a little bit of interest or in a treasury bill. And those are things that you could do. The main thing with the emergency fund is you want to be able to get to it. And when in terms of long-term investing, that's why sometimes how much money you have overall saved plays a big difference. If you have $5 million, let's say when you retire, then you probably need a smaller emergency savings component or invested safely than if you only have $1 million. So if you have $1 million and you're a year away from retirement, then you probably need to be more careful with your funds. Um, back to what I did for additional savings. So it hit me in the last couple of months that for me personally and in my situation, if I get disabled, all is well. We have enough in savings that we're fine. We have life insurance, we have disability insurance, all is fine. But someone I know close to me had breast cancer. Another person had Guillain-Barré and was on the vent and could barely walk. And I realized, like, what if something happens to my husband and he needs to be in a nursing home? And I realized, currently he has disability insurance with his work, but if he changes jobs and can't get disability insurance, that could be a problem. So I looked at long-term care insurance, and it's pretty expensive. And so when I was looking at it, it just seemed pretty expensive, and it only provided long-term care for like 3 years. I'm like, why am I going to pay this much money each year and then only have 3 years of benefit? So for him, we actually got a quote for another disability policy, an individual one. And for his individual disability policy, because he already has one through work, they would only give a small amount of money a month. So he only could get like $600 a month in a disability policy. But it has a rider on it that if he's catastrophically disabled, he gets an extra almost $3,000 a month. So costs us $300 or maybe $330 a year for this disability policy. And we just got that for him because I thought, you know what, if he changes jobs, it's or if he stays at his current job, at least if he ends up, like my friend on the vent who couldn't walk, like at least have that extra income. Because I thought, we'd be fine, but if without his income, but if we had $6,000 or $7,000 a month in long-term care costs, that would be pretty stressful for us now. So that was sort of a workaround that, we just did for our family that I thought was a cheap way to sort of protect us. And I think when you have things like that in place, then you probably can have less of an emergency fund.
It's interesting because it happens that's what life happens sometimes. A couple of weeks ago, White Coat Investor had a podcast. They interview another cardiologist who had a brain tumor and he was off for like 7 weeks. Now he's back to work, fortunately, but he said, if I knew what would happen, the thing that he wanted to do differently was the disability, changing his disability policy and increase the amount of a disability policy. So this surgeon, this cardiologist is looking into waiting another year so that he can actually buy some more disability. I think that's something that a lot of people kind of don't think about it.
Well, and for us personally, like I didn't want a big expense from another insurance policy that we probably didn't need, but this was actually perfect because it really only provides extra income if there's something major, but it's a cheap way. And then he doesn't have to have more underwriting if he would switch jobs. If he loses his other, then he can just increase his benefit on this. So I will say, I've done several disability policies now for clients. And I have been surprised at how hard it can be to get covered for disability insurance. And so definitely, I've had multiple people just flat out declined or a lot of riders. So I would say get it when you're healthy and don't wait. And then, there are different companies. You want to make sure you have you go with a reputable company, but there is at least one company that for surgeons, if you can't practice as a surgeon, they give you 100% of your disability. So I think if you're a surgeon, you want to potentially go to that company versus other companies. So that was something I didn't know until I, started in this business.
Very good. Hey, Anna, I know we're kind of passing our time, but could you explain about life insurance briefly? Because you mentioned that life insurance and disability insurance somewhere in your presentation.
Yes. So I think life insurance is important. I'm not really a fan of, in general, I would say getting layered term insurance is a great way for a lot of people to do insurance. And so the idea is, there's whole life insurance where You pay a premium, and then you have life insurance each year in general, and then you're going to have life insurance for the rest of your life, but you have to keep paying for it. And that's me probably oversimplifying it. That tends to be more expensive. With term insurance, you're paying for insurance for 10 or 20 years, but then after that, you don't have insurance. And so I wish I could shake like every 20 or 25-year-old and tell them to get like $1 million 30-year term policy, because that way when they have kids, they've had themselves covered. But one way to do life insurance is to do sort of layered terms. So maybe get like a 10-year policy and then a 20-year policy. Sometimes people will do a smaller whole life or index universal life or variable life. Those tend to be very expensive and tend to not keep up with inflation. And I would say for most people, unless you're a very conservative person, those shouldn't be the majority of your retirement plan.
Mm.
And I have seen
Okay.
where people are just saving a ton of money for life insurance and they don't have hardly any money to spend elsewhere. And I think that's it can just make things challenging, but it's very important. And so you just want to find what fits for you.
Mm. I guess it is, it really goes back to your value and what matters and what's your priorities even in your finance decisions.
That's what it's really all, it comes down to
Yeah.
that long-term goals. And I think that's why I was so turned off at 30, because people were just telling me like, how much do you want to invest? And for me, it was, I just needed to, there was an outcome that I wanted, and I needed to figure out how to get, to there. And if someone would have sat down and been like, where do you want to be? How can I help you get there? And then you just look at the client, their individual and unique personalities, knowledge, connections, and you figure out how can we get you get you there. And that's what, someone asked about, how can you have a greater than 7% return? Well, I can't guarantee anything, but when I sit down with people, I try to look at what are their unique talents, and what is their knowledge, and what are their connections, and so how can we optimize every single thing for this person?
That's a really comprehensive, I guess it's not just the finance, but you're focusing on the finance, but actually that helps the clients look at their entire life as a whole and try to make it fit. Okay, good. I think we answered most of the questions. Do you want to kind of explain about your service, like
Okay.
how you work with the clients, and if they have any other questions, I mean, there's a contact information, everything, but if you can just kind of
So
explain one more time.
So, I mean, the best way, if you're interested in talking with me, again, I'm happy to do a free risk assessment where basically we look at the risk that you want, and then we look at the risk that you have, and then the risk that you probably should have. And so that's a service that I'm happy to provide free of charge. I meet with everybody once for free. I do all sorts of, I work with Peterman Financial, and so we do comprehensive financial planning. So we can do insurance, life insurance, disability, portfolio management, but you can work with me and not invest $1 with me. I like the planning component of financial planning. And so I can do fee-based or I can do asset management, but really I'm just in this to help people. It's like being an ER doctor, except I don't have screaming psych patients. But really, I think that's what I like about financial planning, and that's what I like about emergency medicine. It's about serving people, helping people, and that brings joy to my life.
Thank you so much. It's the more talk I hear from you, it's like, oh, I'm so grateful to get to know you. I don't know how we met together, but I'm still I'm so grateful to have you as my colleague, and then I introduce some of the people who wants to have some financial advisor. So yeah, I think do you guys have any other questions? I think Veronica said thank you, and we answer Angel's questions, and I'm sure there's other people watching the recording later on. Hopefully they reach out to you with any other questions or more further, work with you or having some free consultation. I think that's a good service that you offer. Any
But again,
last
you don't have
comments?
to work with me. I was gonna say, you don't have to work with me, but just start thinking about your finances and your goals again, because my Barnes and Noble date with my colleague is sort of what changed my life and set me down this path. And he probably got me to retirement at least 5 years sooner. So, and I blame him. I'm like, you're why I have this side gig. He just laughs. But
So funny. You're so funny, Anna. You keep saying you don't have to work with me, but maybe it's good to work with you if they need
well, I was
your
gonna say,
service.
I was gonna say, I mean, I love working with clients, but the big
Yes.
component of this and doing this is really, I just want people to be basically financially healthy. So,
Yes, being education and informed and make wise decisions in finance early enough so that they don't have to wait 20, 30, 40 years to retire. All right, thank you so much. And well, I'll see you around, Anna, because I know you're in my mastermind, so I'll see you
yes,
around. Okay,
thank you
thank you,
so.
everyone.
Have a good
Bye.
one. Bye bye.
You too. Bye.